Hi, you guys. Welcome to episode number 273. I am excited to bring this show particularly because it disrupts the way that most people are taught about podcast guesting. So we've talked about podcast guesting a lot here on this show, but this is for those of you that are really interested in working intentionally to use podcast guesting to become known. This is for those of you who are either new in business, but really this is primarily for those of you guys who are scaling companies, all right? This show, we talk about strategies to become known and establish yourself as a thought leader, not just to go on shows that have a ton of listeners and hopefully get a couple of downloads of your PDF freebie. We're beyond that, and we're talking about the next level of using podcast guesting for thought leadership and become known on this show. So if you are an established business, you're in the process of scaling, you're a coach, an author, a speaker, a consultant, a niche service expert, and you want to make sure everybody knows that you are the leader of a different way of thinking in a different space, or you have a methodology, or you have a program that's really leading the way. If you still feel like perhaps you're that best kept secret, this is the show for you to listen to. At the end of this show, you are going to be given very specific implementation steps. We actually have an implementation section at the end of that, so make sure you hang out for that. And you're going to know which shows are the right ones for you. You're even going to rethink your podcast pitching topics, and we're going to talk about the power of networking and where to look for the right hosts and the right shows for you. My guest today is a very good friend. We've been friends for quite a few years now since I've had the Sweet Life Entrepreneur podcast. She has truly sent us the best guests that are just ready to deliver you guys gold. As a matter of fact, if you've been a listener for years, quite a few of our amazing guests have come from this incredible woman and her team. This is Angie Trueblood that's chatting with you here today on the show. She's the founder of the Podwize Group and host of the Go Pitch Yourself podcast, and she uses her entrepreneurial spirit, innovative thinking, and super connector powers to deeply support business owners who are using podcast guesting as the core of their business growth. Now, Angie, on a personal side, is super passionate about normalizing the voices of women in leadership positions, which she feels privileged to play an active role in through her work. And kind of a funny little thing, Angie and I are both like bird watching dorks. So over Christmas, we were like sending each other these pictures of these like bird feeders that have cameras in them that you can like identify the kind of bird that's eating on your bird feeder. So there's just a little bit behind the scenes of how much we geek out when we talk, whether it's about ridiculous bird feeders or finding you guys the right shows to become known. So if this is what you're looking for, I promise you I don't talk about bird feeders with her on this show, just sharing a little behind the scenes with you guys. Then we're going to dive into it today. All of the show notes can be found by visiting sweetlifepodcast.com/273. This is episode number 273. The show notes will contain the transcription, all of the downloads, the links to connect with Angie, and the summary of what we talked about. So they are pretty valuable if you haven't been to our show notes. It's kind of a hidden patch of gold if you haven't tapped into that. All right, so if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and dive in with Angie Trueblood. Hey, you guys, I'm so glad that you're here. I am here with my friend Angie Trueblood, and Angie has really been the guide for us in podcast guesting, as well as her company actually sends the best, my favorite podcast guests over to us. Anytime we get something from Angie and her team saying, hey, listen, you should really interview this person, we stop everything that we're doing and we check it out. So today we're talking about, and we're continuing our series on becoming known. This is episode number 273, and we are diving into the very specifics of why podcast guesting and how podcast guesting can advance your mission to become known. And what we're really going to dive into today are some things that you probably don't hear on most shows about how to be a podcast guest or expand your reach through podcast guesting. So we're going to pull back the curtain, especially for those of you guys that are a bit more advanced in entrepreneurship, and help you understand how do you use podcast guesting to scale your company. Angie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, friend. It's so good to see you.
I know. We're on video now, you guys.
Yeah.
If you aren't watching us on video, as I said to Angie, we're doing video, but we actually don't have it up yet. We will by then. This will be on YouTube, so you should check it out on YouTube as well. So, Angie, when we talk about podcast guesting, it's obviously not a big secret that podcast guesting is a great opportunity to become known. But what are people not being told? What is the flow of the masses, and what do we want to talk about today in a way to not necessarily disrupt that, but help our listeners to rethink and maybe catapult above the masses who are trying to be podcast guests?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the primary thing that we see not happening in the industry is not enough focus being spent on being strategic with who people are pitching. And there's a myriad of things within the pitches. But I think from a higher level business growth perspective, really identifying the types of audiences that are going to move your business forward. Also, identifying the types of hosts that are going to help you be known and become an authority in a particular space are really important pieces that I don't always see happening out there in the podcast pitching and guesting conversations.
Right. There's so much pressure to, be on EO Fire or, be on Online Marketing Made Easy and be on these huge shows. And PR coaches teach you to work your way up to those shows. But I love the conversations that you and I have about the fact that those shows aren't really the winning places for many people who need to become known and establish thought leaderships. Why is that?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of the bigger shows, candidly, are changing their model. I mean, we could go on about this forever. But some of the shows are charging to have guests come on. And to me, that kind of shifts the intent of the podcast from getting in front of audiences to it being more of like a sponsored collaboration. So that, to me, for some of the bigger shows is a whole different ball of wax. I mean, I would say the niche piece of it, and that's what we do really well. And I think it's because internally, I'm a very big nerd. I love research. My background is in science. I just hired someone. She's from a PR firm. They serve tech companies. So we're a little nerdy over here at the Podwize Group. But really digging in and seeing what are some of these shows that might not have millions of downloads, but have a really engaged audience in a particular vertical. So for me, I almost shift my verticals of who we position me as a guest on, like who we outwardly reach out to. Last year, I had a big focus. I wanted to guest on shows that were hosted by podcast producers so that I would have a relationship with producers so they could refer their clients to us. It has worked in the sense that I've created relationships with a lot of producers, but I've also found that a lot of people who have their own podcast are a little cash strapped, especially if they have a producer, and they're not always willing to come up off of it, to have another level of service provider. But it was a great experimentation for us. Where I see the best benefit is really identifying these niched complementary service providers. So for your listeners who are scaling, they know who they serve. They know what they do for them. Finding people who serve that same audience, but in a different way, is really key to getting in front of an audience and actually having a really good shot of having your pitch accepted.
Right. It's such an interesting strategy. And I think that there, like I said, there's so much pressure about wanting to be on these really big shows. But what you're saying and what we talk about is the gold, you've heard that, like the riches are in the niches. Well, the podcast is the same thing. And I love that you're talking about that. So our listeners really need to establish their goals and who the decision makers are. So as you guys are listening to this and trying to identify how to apply this to your business, I want you to think of your buyer. I want you to think of the person that is going to be making a decision about whether or not they buy your services. If you guys are listening and you're still in what we call that scale level where you're selling your coaching and your programs to other individuals, then where are they, and where are they not being inundated and, fire hosed with people just like you, right? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, a great exercise for your listener to do is make a list of the clients that you've coached before. I'm sure many are in the hundreds. So the ones that really stand out in your mind, that you were really successful, you saw breakthroughs, and you also enjoyed it. Also, if they send referrals your way, that's a bonus too. So make a list of those clients that you've had before, and then really describe their industry. That's one thing we do with all of our clients on our intake call is I don't want to know that they're 25 to 35 years old and interested in wellness. Like, that's cool. But tell me if it's a B2B, because we work with a lot of B2B clients, who are they? Like, describe them. What industry are they in? Are they copywriters? Did you have this one client who was a Facebook ad strategist and whatever you did for them was amazing? Then we want to find niche shows that are possibly talking to Facebook ad strategists or service providers like virtual assistants. Or we have a client right now and she helps C-suite leaders really kind of take their style and use it as an asset to showing up authentically. She works with hospital CEOs and law firm partners. So we're finding shows that are talking to attorneys and women in non-traditional spaces, really. So you got to figure out who are the people that you love working with. Let's start there, because you obviously connect with them. So showing up on a show that is speaking to an audience of those people, they're going to pick up on your energy. And then when they come to chat with you, you're both going to have that synergy.
Right. What a great example. And thank you for sharing about your client. And this triggers me to want to share with you guys. So one of the things that the Podwize Group helped us with is making a list of shows where people who want to license their content or create a certification program are listening. And so these other shows, it's not all online business. I have an online business podcast, right? Like, pitching me on another podcast that's kind of a lot like mine doesn't make a lot of sense, right? But where are those other places? What are those other podcasts, or what are those other genres, if you will, that my higher level clients that are moving into licensing content to companies and other businesses might be listening to? And they might not even be in the online business space. No. And so that was a really good exercise for us to go to. They could be corporate consultants, that want to do this. So that was a really good exercise. And so that's go through that process, like Angie said, and really identify and kind of break that mold that you've been told in, just pitch to the big ones, do the, what is it called? Like the PR ladder, where you get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And although that's fine, but sometimes the gold, and we're seeing this kind of across the board, it's been a trend for the last 18 months, that the bigger shows, the bigger programs, so that, people just don't really want to be there anymore. They want to be known. They want to be in spaces where their people are, where they don't feel like just a drop of water in the ocean. And so this totally aligns with that. Okay, so let's kind of switch. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, a lot of the well-known shows are catering to beginning business owners. So depending on what your service is, they're not at a point, unless you have a DIY offering, they're not at a point. They will, rightly so. I did it when I was new in business, but they are there to get as much free content as they can while they're getting everything lined up. But if you have packages that are multi-thousands of dollars, people that are business owners like you and I and your listeners, like, think of the shows that you are listening to. Are you listening to Online Marketing Made Easy? Maybe, but I'm not any longer.
Not anymore.
Yeah. So that's why the niche piece is so incredible, because no matter what stage of business you're in, who doesn't want to listen to a podcast that's telling the ins and outs of your specific industry?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So hopefully we have you guys rethinking what shows you're pitching. Angie, I want you to speak for a minute. You talked about it a little bit before about networking, but when we're talking about becoming known, which is the purpose of this series, how can we use networking through podcasting to become known, regardless of where the show is? Now let's kind of switch gears a little bit into that area of gold that I don't think that people talk about often enough.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of my primary networking tools. I am currently most active on other people's podcasts and LinkedIn. And it really just has to do with you seeing these interviews as an opportunity to develop a relationship with a host that exists after the podcast interview goes live. So that's the first piece of it and it comes back again to strategically choosing the types of shows you're going to be on. Maybe the show that you're pitching is not hosted by someone that has a giant audience, but if you know they're a super connector, we've pitched shows recently to where the show is really not that big, but the host has a massive LinkedIn following. And so that's awesome. Like, let's get connected with that person because you can interact with them and their network. So the host is one piece of it. And then you can drive listeners to actually connect with you, right? So I think that's the beauty of podcast guesting. And one way to stand out is to show up as a human, to show up as craving relationships and wanting to connect with others and guiding people. Like at this point in the interview, your listener knows that I'm active on LinkedIn. So It would be a natural thing after this interview, like connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a DM if you have a question about what we're talking about. So that's really two pieces, is encourage the listener and talk to the listener, have them being active participant in the conversation. And then, I mean, the host is just priceless, really.
Right. Oh my gosh, that is so smart. And I feel like, especially just a side note with LinkedIn and how active you have been on LinkedIn, I have seen your networking on LinkedIn and how much you're doing on there, and it's just been a real game changer for you, and I know a lot of other people as well. So definitely do connect with Angie on LinkedIn. We'll make sure her LinkedIn profile information is in the show notes here. Okay, so today we've talked about rethinking becoming known through podcasting. We have talked about rethinking what everybody's saying about wanting to be on the big shows and really hunting for the gold in specific areas, specific niches. And you talked about doing so in such a way that establishes thought leadership in a space. How would you help our listeners understand or define? Thought leadership is defined in so many different ways, but is there a specific strategy or a specific, how do I want to ask this question so it's useful for our users? If somebody says, I want to be known as the XYZ, as a person who helps them connect to the right podcasts, what are your first steps to help them accomplish that goal?
A lot of times what we do is elevate the talk topics that they typically bring to us. We recently had a Jumpstart client where we create the strategy, the pitch list, the template, everything, and hand it over to them for their team to pitch. And she came in, so she's an operations consultant, and she came in and had previously pitched herself occasionally. And there was a ton of how-to topics. And I went through and I was like, nope, you're not at this level anymore. Nope, the people you want to work with don't want to know this stuff. So a lot of it is about up-leveling. When I started pitching myself, it was all how to. Here's like the 5 things to include in a pitch. It was very how to. Now we're elevating into what's the impact that guesting can have? How can you repurpose and not work yourself to death creating content? So think about, to be a thought leader, it really does revolve around having a different idea of your industry or a unique perspective that others don't have. For us, it's all about the relationships and the long-term impact it can have. So I would encourage you, listener, as you're especially looking in the scale phase and looking to connect with pretty high-level decision makers, get yourself out of the how-to topics. Like, get yourself into the this is what's going on in our industry. This is the impact that the work that I do can have, and this is how we can impact your business, your company, your clients.
Wow, that was everything right there. I think if you guys are here and you need to hit rewind and go back 15 seconds like 3 times and listen to what Angie just said, because now we have wrapped it together in a very powerful fireball for you. Is change the shows you're looking to pitch yourself on. If you've been going after the masses, look for hosts that are very industry specific and where your decision makers are, where your buyers are. Know your buyers. Know if you're going from the newbie buyer to the advanced buyer. And finally, and this is gold, seriously, this is amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Change the topics that you are pitching if you want to level yourself up as a thought leader in your space. Get away from the basic how-tos, which might be what do you call it? Clickbait, might be clickbait topics.
To pitch a podcast.
Right. And instead talk about things kind of like we're talking about here on the show. This show is not titled how to grow whatever your business through podcast guesting. We did those shows 4 years ago, right? Yeah. Now we're talking about how to rethink podcast guesting and what people aren't telling you about podcast guesting to truly establish thought leadership in your space and become known. And Angie is our go-to person. I think I've made that really clear. Just really appreciate her work. I also will say this. If your business is to the level where you have teams pitching you, Angie's company is really great with that, okay? Yeah. So also if you're listening, if you're self-pitching, that's awesome. Like keep it up, keep up the work, make sure that you're being mindful about your pitching, and we're going to connect you with Angie and resources to do this. If you're to that place where you have your teams pitching and you're building teams to pitch you, that's really what we lean on a lot for Angie, and a lot of our higher level clients do that as well. So, okay, let's wrap this all up. What did I not ask you in this consideration of using podcast guesting to become known at a higher level that maybe I should have? Was there something that I didn't cover that we would be doing our listeners a disservice if we didn't quickly hit on?
I mean, I think a lot of it is then you get the interview and you show up to record. How can you stand out? How can people who are listening develop an understanding of who you are and how you serve? And it is about storytelling. It is about sharing some of the specific examples that I shared today about the operations client, about the client that has, working with attorneys. Get a couple of those. Like I took notes before we popped on live because I knew the angle and the direction that our conversation was going to take. And so you need to be prepared to create some depth to your stories, because just sharing what you think doesn't trigger the audience to picture you as a thought leader. But when I have clients that serve CEOs of hospital systems, that seems to elevate what I do and who I do it for. So especially as you're stepping into thought leadership, have some higher level stories, higher level examples kind of on cue in order to give more descriptors to your answers of questions.
Great. And people connect so much better through stories
for sure
as well. And you seem more credible.
For sure.
Even though we know you're already credible. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here listening to this show and figuring out how to do this. So we all know, the three of us know you are super credible. We just want to make sure everybody else that hears you knows that you're super credible and you've helped other people before.
Well, and stories. I mean, that's what I want to listen to when I listen to a podcast. I don't need another how-to at the moment. I need just give me examples. I want to hear what other people are doing.
Right. I love that. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. Okay. So implementation, next steps, how do people connect with you? What is the best way? And guys, we will drop this in the show notes as well, but take a pause here for a second and go and connect with Angie where she's about to tell you too.
Yeah.
How is that?
The best place to find any way to connect with me is over on the website, thepodwizegroup.com. It's Podwize with a Z. /hi there. And there will be links to learning about our services, We have them if you want us to pitch you, if you want us to prep what you or your team pitch you, and we even have strategy sessions. For those of you who are looking for like the actual pitch, because I know that is always a question I get, even though we were not talking about it, there's a download there so you can see pitches that my team and I have actually sent, and my links for LinkedIn are there as well. So all the places that you might want to connect, depending on where you are in your journey, is at thepodwizegroup.com/hi there.
Resources of gold, you guys. All right. Angie, thank you so much. Thank you for being my friend and somebody I know always tells me the truth about anything that we're talking about in podcasting. Thank you for sending us some of the top-notch best guests who have been here on this show. And thank you for pouring out so much gold to our listeners and always just freely giving first. And I just really appreciate you for that.
Yeah, same too, friend. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, guys. Well, there you have it from the insider herself, Angie Trueblood with the Podwize Group. So let's talk really quick about your implementation steps. First of all, I use Angie. I love her. Obviously, she didn't pay to be on this show. I asked her to come on here and be part of this Becoming Known series because I know she's so incredibly valuable for you, as she has been for us. So definitely check out what they are doing over there. Whether or not you're in a position to work with them, get in their ecosystem because you're going to be glad you did. So let's talk about your implementation steps after this show. What are we going to do to implement? So here's really quick wrap up for you. This was a big concept we talked about, and it was a change of thinking to what you might have done before regarding podcast guesting. So pick one thing that you are going to do or think about or strategize from what we talked about in this show. I can tell you right now, as a team, we're going to be going back and making sure the titles of the shows that I am speaking on, the titles of the topics, are not these basic topics based on our audiences that we work with now. We're going to revisit our topics, which, of course, Angie and our team help us do as well. I think that was a huge piece of gold in this show. But it depends on who you guys are trying to reach, right? So if you're trying to reach those people that are new to your space, whatever it is you do, then those how-tos are amazing. If you're trying to use this show to establish thought leadership for yourself, then let's rethink the topics that you are pitching and what you're saying on the shows that you become a guest on. Let's help you to make sure that you are helping others rethink, and therefore that's going to level you up more towards thought leadership in your space, and of course solve the goal that we're talking about here, which is becoming known. So if you're good to go and you think your titles are great, what else can you do? You can start researching shows that are very niche specific, very, not necessarily very small shows, but smaller shows that have a good engagement. Check out their social media handles, check out their LinkedIn. LinkedIn has just been so hot, especially for the last couple of months, especially the last 18 months. So find out how much interaction is happening with those shows. It doesn't matter if they don't have a gazillion downloads. If they have an interactive audience, and like Angie said, a host that has a bigger following, that has a relationship with their listeners, that could be the gold target that you're going after as far as podcast guesting. So that's your implementation wrap up. Thank you so much for listening to this show. I'm April Beach. If we don't know each other, it's so great to meet you. You can find all of the information that we shared from this episode by going to sweetlifepodcast.com/273. This is episode number 273. And all the other resources we have for you are at sweetlifeco.com. All right. You guys have a fantastic day. Talk to you soon.